very warm welcome to you, Professor Day. You teach at the University of Hawaii and you are the father of extensive reading. So we are now going to talk on extensive reading. So let's begin again at the very beginning.
Okay.
What is the difference between extensive and intensive reading?
Good question. Intensive reading are these three approaches that we had talked about before: grammar translation, comprehension questions, and skills and strategies. That we call intensive, in which students will look at a reading passage intensively, study it, and so maybe during a semester's worth of reading instruction, they might look at 7 or 8 texts, reading passages intensively. Extensive reading is the exact opposite. It's looking, reading, playing with many, many, many books. It's based on the idea that we learn to read by reading. So the idea is to engage in the act of reading extensively.
I just want to, I'm very curious about this. You know, when you give so many books to the students to read, do you expect the teacher to also have read all the books?
Well, that would be wonderful. That would really be nice. And you know, I've talked to a lot of teachers, and most of them, over time, will have read all the books. And that is important, because one of the things that we know is that a teacher should be a role model of reading. And this idea of reading is caught or taught, and if the teacher has read the books and she shares it and says, this is a good book, I think that maybe you might want to read this. So the teacher in an extensive reading program should guide the students. Students might not be familiar with a lot of the books. They don't know necessarily how to choose a book. They might get stuck. And if you, as the teacher, have read a book and you know that the student might like a book on a particular topic by a certain author, you could say, you might like this one. You might really enjoy this book.
So even at the primary and say the middle level, the teacher should go through the library herself first. So that's a lot of homework for the teacher.
Actually, what the teacher should really do is work with the librarian in building up the library. As we know, the most effective teachers know their students. The more we know about our students, how they learn, their learning styles, their likes, their dislikes, the better teachers we are. So if you know your teachers very well, your students very well, you can work with the librarian in ordering books, making sure that library has books that are going to fit your students' needs and interests.
And perhaps we could even work with the senior students who've probably been through the mill.
Of course.
You know, and that so that students feel involved in the whole process.
That's a good idea. I have never thought of that. That's really nice.
In fact, in a particular school in Delhi, we have the students who would sort of write their stories or whatever, and that would become the part of the library.
Yes, that's common, right?
That's
students
common,
writing their own stories.
And that's used by for several years.
That's
So
very nice.
That's nice.
Very nice.
All right. I'd like to now ask you, what sort of texts should we include for extensive reading? And that comes to the very tricky question of authentic reading material.
Materials are the heart and soul of an extensive reading program. Without a wide range of books on a different levels of readability, from easy to more difficult, an extensive reading program fails. So materials are the key. Then, what do I mean by materials? I mean by this materials that are written for language learners, not materials that have been written for an L1 readership, but that have been written for second language learners. I call this language learner literature. Language learner literature.
It's a genre.
It's a genre, just like adult, just like science fiction, just like anything. Children's literature is a genre.
Of course.
And language learner literature is a genre. The difficulty we come into in language teaching is that a lot of teachers think that material that they use has to be written for an L1 audience. And they call that authentic material. It's got to be authentic. It has to be written for an L1 audience.
It's part of the CLT training we all got.
It's from the communicative language teaching approach, and that is a terrible mistake.
So what is your take on that?
Well, I believe it's a mistake because that is the goal. We want students eventually, not tomorrow or next year or next month, but eventually to be reading material that was written for an L1 readership. But we don't start with the goal. We have to start with where our students are. They have to receive material that has been specially written for them, for beginners, for intermediate.
So do we simplify the text, the authentic text?
We don't simplify. That's a word that I try to avoid. Okay. And the reason I try to avoid the word simplify is obvious. It has a negative connotation, a negative meaning. Simple materials, you know, you think, oh, simple, right? So rather, I think that we would rather use appropriate materials. Materials that are appropriate for our students' age, cognitive development, and language level. And also cultural situations is very important.
Yes.
Very important.
Yes.
So we have a variety of factors that we want to make sure to ensure that a book is appropriate. Now, let's return to this idea of authenticity again.
Yes.
Often we have found, and you mentioned this a little while ago, books that have been written for an L1 audience like Dickens' Tale of Two Cities, or Moby Dick, or any of these classics.
You find them in all our libraries.
Now what happens is a publisher will hire a writer to modify these books to be appropriate for a level of language learners.
Is that okay with you?
That's fine. I don't have a problem with that.
Okay.
Just like in any language, any reading material, some of these, what I call modified or adapted readers, are terrible.
Yes.
They're just terrible. Some are really, really good.
Yes, true.
So it's just like any other book that you can purchase. It can be good or it can be lousy. So it's not a question of is modified or adapted readers appropriate. You know, should we use them? Well, yeah, but be careful because some are lousy and some are really good.
Okay. But Dr. Day, you know, you read, say, Jane Eyre at the level of level 1, and then level 2, and then level 3.
Yeah.
Do you do that? I mean, is that what you're advocating?
This is a good question.
Yeah.
Let's sort of move a little away from the authentic material to what should students read. Okay, so we say there's something out there called language learner literature, and we would like our students to be reading this material because it's appropriate for them in a variety of means. Now, if we want them to read a lot of books, they've got to be easy.
Yes. True.
Because no one, for pleasure or to help them, wants to read hard stuff. You want to read easy stuff. But if you've got a class of, say, 40 or 50 students, what's easy for one student may be hard for another student.
True.
So in an extensive reading program, we let students self-select. We let students choose their own books. So if they want to read a modified L1 book, if they want to read Jane Eyre, or they want to read Charles Dickens, or John Grisham, or whatever, fine. It's up to them. And if once they start reading a book and they find it's either too easy or too hard or boring, they don't like it, they are free to stop reading.
Okay. Now, for intensive reading, we are used to a lot of activity types. But what we find in the extensive reading books as well, what we call here the supplementary readers.
Yes.
In India, they call the supplementary readers.
Right.
They're the same kind of comprehension questions.
Yeah.
So do you think there are different kinds of questions that you ask for intensive and you ask for extensive?
Okay. That's a good term, the supplemental readers. When I use these sorts of books in my own teaching, I have my students ignore them. I don't want them to do it. It's again that part of that death by comprehension questions. You know, you read a book and now you've got to answer the questions. For example, everyone knows Mother Teresa.
Yes.
So if you've read a biography of Mother Teresa and you look in the detailed comprehension questions at the end and it said, where was Mother Teresa born?
Yes.
Who cares?
Who cares?
You know, a more interesting thing is, do you think Mother Teresa was happy? What was the impact of Mother Teresa's life? Now, those kinds of questions won't be found at the end of these supplemental readers. If the teacher can get the students to engage in the books on a personal level, what motivated Mother Teresa to do that with her life?
Yeah.
Would you like to have a life like Mother Teresa? So what you're doing is you're thinking about this and you're relating it to your own life.
So you don't have what are known as the scanning and the skimming kind of questions.
Not in extensive reading.
Yes.
But there are a lot of nice things that teachers can do after students have read a book. One of them that I really like is writing activities. I think it's fun because I think reading and writing go together very
Yes,
naturally.
yes.
So in my extensive reading work, I have students engage in writing activities after they finished a book on their own.
Is it something like a book review?
Well, there
which is very common in India.
Well, book reviews are terrible, frankly.
Oh, they are, okay.
Students hate to write them and teachers hate to read them.
Yeah, but they're perennially used.
Oh, yeah, I would say down with book reviews.
Teachers,
yes.
Listen to what he says.
Yeah.
Down with book reviews.
You know, what actually is better?
That's a slogan.
Yeah, down with book
Book
reviews. What actually can be better would be something like this is, did you like the book? Why or why not? Write about it. This is sort of similar to what we do when, as adults, when we finish reading a book, I'll share it with you.
Yes,
I'll say, boy, if you ought to read this book, it is really interesting.
Yeah.
You know, then you talk about it and you engage someone else in it. We try to get our students to do that on a written level, or even on an oral level.
Yes,
On an oral level, that
Yeah.
can be done. So we could work on listening and speaking by having students share what they liked about a book with their classmates.
So it's like a presentation that they make?
It could be. It could be. Actually, I like to work in small groups.
Okay.
Because if you do an oral presentation in a class of 40, takes forever and it's
it will
boring.
be, yes.
But if you do it in a group of 3, and
Yeah.
then the 3 of us, you go first, then me, then the third person, we all get to share.
Yeah,
We all
yes.
get to share. Then an activity that I wanted to mention about writing that I think is nice, it doesn't have to do with a book review or a report, is what I call the gift. I ask my students when they finish to make a list of 4 or 5 of the major characters in the book. And then think about what presents they would give, what gifts they would give to each of them.
Wow, that's...
And then write about it. I would give this person this and this and this.
This is an amazing question. In fact, you had mentioned it when we talked about it.
Yes.
And I did tell a friend of mine, I said, this is just the most amazing question one could ask. And you actually, you get the whole character.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
That's what you, instead of saying, write the character of...
Did you like the character of so-and-so? No, instead of that, you're approaching it a very different way.
So what gift would you give the 5 characters in the book? So, and you have to look at the characters. And have to write a description of the characters. And then at the end of it, it's the most brilliant...
And it's simple.
And it's so simple.
And I call this, in my work with teachers, a 5-star activity.
Why do you...
It's a 5-star activity because there's no teacher preparation time.
Yes.
And it's a good activity for students.
Yeah.
So the teacher doesn't have to spend a lot of time preparing this activity.
Yes, and yet you get brilliant answers. Can you just share some of the answers that you may have got? You know, can you just share? I know it's...
well, it's difficult because we don't, our teachers won't know the books we're talking about. But I've had some very, very interesting gifts. One of the most incredible ones I will never forget. There's a wonderful story. It's a Cambridge University English reader series, level 2.
Yes.
The name of the book is called JoJo's Story.
Okay.
It's a story about a young boy who was caught up in the wars in Serbia and Croatia.
Okay.
And its story, let me tell you how it opens. Chapter 1. It opens like this. It's Thursday. No. Monday. Tuesday. Wednesday. It's Wednesday. Yes, it's Wednesday. Is it the afternoon or the morning? But what do I care if it's afternoon or morning? Everybody's dead. There's no time. Why aren't I dead too? And the story goes on like that. He has been orphaned. Everybody in his village was slaughtered, and he was left alone. And it tells the story of some soldiers from the United Nations coming through and finding this poor boy. This is level 2, very low-level reader. And I had one of my students read that book, and I said, what gift would you give? Because there was a couple of soldiers and JoJo and then a village elder from another village. She said, I would give JoJo love.
Wow. Whoa. I have goosebumps.
Oh, yes,
yes. Wow.
Yes, I had never thought of that. You know, a sweater, some shoes, food. I would give JoJo love.
Wow, this is just amazing.
Isn't it something?
Yeah, and I think it's an amazing activity.
Yes.
And it would really, sensitize the readers to to feelings of this kind, which is what we want now.
Can you imagine her, how she felt when she was reading that? It was just, and I get, this is not uncommon. When I have my students do extensive reading, they get involved.
Oh.
I do an activity in my classes called DEAR.
DEAR.
DEAR. Well, actually in Hawaii I call it SURF, but I'll explain DEAR and SURF.
Yeah.
DEAR means drop everything and read.
Okay.
DEAR. And when I say DEAR,
that means drop everything.
Whatever they're doing, they reach down, pick up a book, and they're silent reading. Not oral reading by the students,
yes,
but silent reading. In Hawaii I call it SURF.
Okay.
Silent, uninterrupted reading for fun.
Okay.
Surf.
Okay.
So I say surf.
Okay.
And students surf. And what happens is, at the end of the time, I can't get students to stop.
Oh, they want to continue.
Yes, teacher, a little longer, because they're engrossed in their books. What a wonderful thing to try to get them to stop reading, not start reading, but stop reading.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you've mentioned some activity types. You've talked of in your articles about the 10 principles
of extensive reading. Yeah.
So can you share with us?
I hope I can remember them.
Okay, as many as you can remember.
I'll give you them. The first one is the reading material should be easy.
Okay.
It just has to be easy. And this is controversial. Teachers, for whatever reason, often think that for students to learn to read, the reading material has to be difficult. And I call this the macho maxim of reading instruction.
Absolutely.
No reading gain without reading pain. Isn't that terrible?
Yes.
You've got to be painful in order to be beneficial.
Yes.
And I say down with that, off with its head. That's the wrong way.
Yes.
And for extensive reading, the motto is reading gain with no pain.
Yes.
Reading gain with no pain. The material has to be easy. Because if we want students to read a lot, it's got to be easy. Okay.
And you would advocate that for intensive reading as well? A bit?
Well, actually, it depends upon the goal for the lesson.
Yeah.
For example, if you're working on making, of guessing the meaning of vocabulary words, then you want to have difficult words in the text.
Yes.
So intensive reading is different.
Different, okay.
Yeah, very different. But I would not want to have a lot of very hard reading, because that's still going to be too difficult.
Too difficult,
yeah.
Okay, so that's point number one. I'm doing the counting.
Okay, so number two is there must be a wide variety of materials on different readability levels, from beginning text with, say, the 100 most frequent words in English to approaching L1 reading, maybe 5,000 word difficulty level. So you'd have this tremendous range, material that will be interesting for girls, for boys, at different levels, different topics. And if that goes back to the thing of, if a library has books, students will become readers.
Yes.
So we've got to have easy material, and there's got to be a lot of it and a wide variety of it.
Yes.
And then the third principle is that readers select their own readings. The students should be free to read what they want, when they want, and how they want it. It's very, very important.
When they want as well?
Sure, definitely.
So what about so it could be homework, it could be in the class, it
should be home fun.
It should be home fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a joke.
Okay.
not homework, but home fun.
Home fun,
yeah.
okay.
No, actually, by the idea of where and when. Some students can read on a bus, some can read on a train, some will read at night, some will read at the weekend, some will read during lunch hour. We're not saying when you have to read it, but just read.
Yeah.
Read.
Okay.
Give them the freedom to read.
Yeah, okay. So it is not now, it's library period. Sit down on your seats or benches and start reading.
No, but I do surf or DEAR every now and then.
Yes, okay.
But in an extensive reading program, most of the reading is done outside of the classroom. Because if we want them to read massive amounts,
then
there's no time in class to do that.
Absolutely
no time. They've got to do it outside of class.
Now it's point number 4.
No, I'm going to give you one little more thing here. Often, I like to use a bit of a carrot.
Okay.
Not a stick, but a carrot. to make sure that students read a lot. And that is, I often give them extra marks for the more books they read.
Oh, okay.
So they'll get extra marks for their final grade if they read more and more and more and more books.
So do they tend to read a lot? They would tend to read a lot more.
Oh, yes, yes.
But wouldn't they tend to read the easier books?
That's the problem, yes. So the very clever students will say, I can read the lower level, easier books more quickly than I can read the more higher level books. So what I often do is say, you've got to read so many higher books to get the full marks and that sort of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, because students are very clever.
Yes, students are much cleverer than the teachers.
Yes, yeah.
So can we get to point number 4?
Point number 4 is, let me think, what is point number 4? Point number 4 is that students read for overall meaning.
Yes.
Overall meaning, not 100% comprehension. We don't have to understand every single word that we read. We don't do that in our first language.
Yes, we
so we read for overall meaning. That's very important. And because there are no follow-up comprehension questions, students don't have to worry about understanding 100%.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. One of the things that teachers ask me is, well, Dr. Day, how do you know students understand? Or, how do you know they're doing the reading? Because we don't have tests, we don't have comprehension questions. Well, we do have these activities, like the gift.
Like the
if
gift,
the student hasn't read the book, can't do the activity.
Cannot do the activity.
Yeah. So there's a check.
Yeah,
there's a check right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So point number 5?
Point number 5 is reading speed is generally faster rather than slower.
And what do you mean by that?
Okay. Because students are reading easy books, interesting books that they've selected themselves. They're reading for overall meaning. They're not reading one word at a time. They're reading very fluently. And remember, we talked about fluent reading, how fluent reading is better reading because you can recognize the words quickly, and the more words that you know, you don't have to stop and figure out, you can create and construct meaning. So they're generally reading faster, and that means they're understanding more and understanding better and understanding more quickly than if they're reading slower.
Yes.
Secondly, we say that students are often reading faster rather than slower because we're asking them to read a lot.
Yes.
And if they're reading slowly,
yes,
they're not going to be able to engage in the amount of reading.
So in a sense, indirectly you're pressurizing a student to read faster.
Yes.
Because that's what would lead to fluency and enjoyment.
Exactly.
Because if you read slowly, you cannot enjoy it.
Enjoy it. You forget what the beginning of, the sentence was or the beginning of the paragraph.
So instead of saying, okay, now I'm going to time you, you're indirectly timing them, but in a very enjoyable
fashion. In an enjoyable way,
fashion.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, that creates this idea of pleasure and enjoyment.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then point number 6, if you can remember.
I'm getting lost here in my points, but I know that there's a very, very, very important one, and that is that the teacher in this program has to introduce the program. Very important. Think about learning when you were in school. You didn't have the freedom that an extensive reading program gives students. You didn't have the freedom to select what you wanted to read, to stop reading, to read a book at home, to read a book over the weekend. You didn't have this freedom.
No.
And you didn't have the freedom to go on with another book on your own without telling the teacher that you were finished. So there's a lot of what we call learner autonomy.
Okay.
Learner autonomy in extensive reading approach. And students aren't used to this freedom. So you've got to orient them, guide them, and tell them, why are you reading easy, interesting books? Tell them the outcomes, what's going to happen. Here's what we have learned from research, not just my opinion, but here's what we know what happens when students engage in extensive reading. Number 1, as we might expect, and we've talked, they become better readers.
Yes.
Number 2, their vocabulary increases. Which is great. Vocabulary is a key to language learning. If you don't know the words, you don't know the language.
Yeah, so could you elaborate a little bit on this vocabulary?
Okay. Yeah, there are 2 types of vocabulary knowledge. Words that you know limited and words that you know a great deal about. Extensive reading allows you to not only learn new words, words that you've never known before, but it also allows the student to learn multiple meanings of a word they already know. So important. So important, because a word just doesn't have one meaning.
Absolutely. So do you give activity types?
Well, that's a great question. That is a very good question. What I do is since I think vocabulary is the key to language learning, I ask my students to keep vocabulary journals.
Oh, wow.
So whenever they finish a book, I tell them to go back and find 10 new words or different meanings of old words and put them in their journal. Write the sentence in which it appears, underline the word, and then either define it, translate it, synonym, antonym, whatever.
Whatever they want.
Whatever they want. I don't care. Okay. And so they do 10 words after every book. They keep it in a journal.
Let me just talk about it to the teachers, because it's such an important point. The teachers, you could encourage, even in your intensive reading, I think.
Sure. Oh, yes, it works.
This kind of vocabulary journal where the student can pick 10 words, and it should not be 100 words. Right. Because we go on to this overkill.
It's overkill.
So it should be like 10 words, which is not difficult for anybody 5 to 10. Maybe begin with 5.
Sure.
And then get them to go on to just 10, and we could put a ceiling to just 10.
I would say 10, yeah.
10.
Yeah.
And then let them do what they want. It shouldn't just be antonyms or synonyms, but whatever else that they want.
The last one it's very important, is that a teacher is a role model. It goes back to this idea of reading is caught, that you as the teacher should engage in the extensive reading program yourself. Be reading the books. Share your enthusiasm and your excitement. Read your gift that you would give.
Read my gift as well.
Yes,
so
you do it. You do
it is not only the students doing it.
Yes, you should do it too. Yeah.
Okay, so it's really learning with the learners,
yes,
in the true sense of the term.
Yes.
Because we talk about it loosely.
Yes.
A learner among learners, but we never do it.
No, but this is it. This is the real deal.
Okay,
yes.
So that's what we should do. So Dr. Day, thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
And our teachers, I have gained a lot. The teachers will also gain a lot, and we hope that you come back soon.
I hope. Looking forward to it.
And we talk to our teachers once more.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.